sound vision?
Can hear you and see you folk brilliantly, thank you.
Awesome. How lucky for you. So apologies, I have Councillor McCallum. Any others?
We've got down Councillor Beard for lateness of the stage, and if he arrives, that's fine.
Yes, he would need to have entered his own late apology though, wouldn't he? Yeah, so we might just leave that. Declarations of interest. And public forums, petitions and deputations, haven't had any notification of those. Confirmation of minutes of the 2nd of September. Somebody like to move those before we... Thank you, Councillor McPhail, seconded Chairman Forrell. Any discussion on those? Great, put that motion then. All those in favour, please say aye. Against?
Aye.
Carried. Thank you. No questions have come to me. I don't have a report myself. Do any councillors have anything to report? Good. So that takes us to, excuse me, I'm just going to fiddle with the sound of my laptop, so if it makes terrible noises, don't phone, because I don't know why it's squeaking. Thank you. So that takes us to item 9, which is, and item 1 of that corporate services report, which is the risk management policy. Neil.
Thank you. I'll kick this off. I'll look at Amy. So Amy and I, as you know, are working through the improving the organisational risk management together. So Amy might help out or chip in at some point. The item for today is to adopt the tabled risk management or the updated risk management policy, and to update council on where we're at with regards to the design and implementation of the risk management framework. Council will recall that we engaged Cook and Associates to help us design and implement the framework to improve our risk management. With that, it kicked off with a...
There's a lot of echoing going on. Somebody's got their sound turned on, haven't they?
Yes, that's why I was messing with mine. So, sorry. And Amy, would you like to come up to the table?
Come up to the table,
Nice.
thank you.
You might as well join us.
Is that feedback from somebody?
Yeah.
Two sources.
I don't think it's me, but I'm happy to mute if that makes sense.
There'll be somebody in the chamber.
Yeah,
Sometimes it's not obvious.
So just you say something, then I hear it over here.
Yeah, well, that's why I checked mine. Yeah.
You're muted there, it's just, yeah.
yeah, I'm joined by audio, so let me just try and bear with me.
Sorry to interrupt you, Neil.
No, that's right.
Rather get this right.
Yeah.
This is pretty annoying.
So, how's that sound?
That's better.
Okay.
All right, so just back to where I was, in terms of we had Cook and Associates, they commenced with interviews of a range of councillors, executive and key staff. They then did a risk maturity assessment and then completed the revisions to the risk management policy, set out the design for the risk framework and a roadmap for us to achieve it. So that was what was intended in the phase. They have completed that work. One of the key aspects that has come through from the work that they've conducted is essentially about risk. We're still having a bit of feedback trouble.
Here we are.
Yeah, I've just... Sorry, Bruce, can you try muting and we'll see if that makes any difference?
Oh yes, I can certainly mute if
It
that's...
shouldn't do, but who knows?
There we go. I just won't speak. That'll be good. That'll be a first one.
Just wave at me so I know you need to speak.
Yes, I found it.
Wasn't me at all.
It's all right, Bruce, we've solved it.
Found the
You can
problem.
talk now. Right, let's try that again. Sorry, Neil.
So one of the critical components coming through is that the management of risk is management. It's not a standalone process that sits aside from day-to-day business or day-to-day activity. It is a thread that is needs to be integrated into all of the programs of work that we have and the consideration and decision making that we have. And that's come through strongly in the policy and in the elements of the framework that Mary Beth has put up. So I have set there what those key elements are that we're proposing for the framework. One of the next tasks is to put some meat on the bones, as it were, in terms of to shape up each of those elements to meet our requirements and make sure it's fit for purpose. That is expected to take between 6 to 8 months, and thereafter in 12 months' time we'll look to do another risk maturity assessment just to measure our progress. And then we get into, I guess, that ongoing continuous improvement loop of getting the feedback, making the changes, improving, then assessing where we're at. Another item that came through and what we're intending to do is to establish a risk leadership group. I guess one of the challenges that we have is just resourcing some of this work, and I think it's felt that by bringing together a risk leadership group that takes ownership over driving the risk maturity of the organisation, that there are benefits associated with that, because it gives us a group, subject matter experts internally that can support the organisation, but also by having a group more so than an individual means that we're getting cross-functional involvement, we're getting diversity in the thinking, spreads the load, and we've got more of a, I guess, a constructive lens or a different lens for assessing the risks. So that's one of the proposals that we have, and we have got Cook and Associates preparing a terms of reference for that group. So where we're at the moment, and I'll talk to the policy shortly. So we've got the policy as tabled. Mary Beth is completing that team terms of ref. The next phase is to then agree and develop the elements to support, or the elements of the framework, and that's to support the integration into our work plans. Then there's commencing the development of those elements. We do want to do a key risk workshop. If you recall, we did some work on that back in December with Bruce. We've got a slightly different policy and slightly different approach here now, so we'd look to go back and redo that, and that would be the first cut of populating our organisational risk register. And then we get into the implementation of the framework and the operation thereof. So just to talk to the policy, you'll note that the policy is very high level, it's very principled policy. One of the things that the advice that we got from Mary Beth was to separate the operational aspects out of our policy, which our previous policy had some aspects in it. So this is very principled, high level, and setting the parameters that we will operate by. And I guess as I sort of alluded to earlier on, it's very driven on risk management is purely management. It is it's a thread that needs to be in all of our work programs and our development decision-making processes. So I'm happy to take questions.
I have been talking to Councillor McCallum and he's left me with some questions, but I'm happy to hear other people's first. So has anybody got questions? and I also have one of my own, so anybody else is okay. So Councillor McCallum was just wondering about how, excuse me for interpreting his questions and presenting them hopefully in the correct manner. He's concerned about communications, both internally, externally, regarding what triggers, when triggers are set, and how we as the council will, at governance, will know when something is.
So an escalation of an incident, is that?
Yeah,
I'm just trying to understand the question.
And how we will know, and that kind of it dovetails with my question. So if I ask my question, that might be better. I was interested in knowing how the risk will be shown to us in the papers that we get, the regular papers that we get, how the measures and the considerations will show up in our regular papers. And I guess Councillor McCallum was kind of asking the same thing, but with a little bit more number based, perhaps. So yeah.
So let me try to answer. So I guess the definition of risk is the effect of uncertainty on our outcomes. So in terms of the decisions that get brought through to council to assist council with making good decisions, we may have some work to do to extrapolate that out, the risks out, and highlight here are the risks that we identify, and these are the risks of doing or not doing or taking this decision. And it could be that there are a number of scenarios, and it's more explicit about the considerations that are behind the recommendation, and highlighting the risk thinking that's there. With regards to, I guess, Councillor McCallum's question.
So the factors and the measurement of said risk was what he was asking about.
I guess there is the need to craft that organisational risk register. You may recall, I think Bruce brought an example through to the workshops that we had in December, and I guess with that, it's there is an evaluation of the risk, that those major key risks, and that puts them on a scale on the graph, and then there is the mitigations that then reduce the risk and and just leaves a residual risk there. That may be what he's talking about. So just highlighting what the initial risk is for that specific item, and the rating of it, and then the work that's being done to mitigate that risk, or the likelihood that it'll occur, or the consequence of its impact, perhaps.
Thanks, yeah, well, and I'm sure Councillor McCallum will follow that up if I haven't made that clear enough. But yeah, I'm just conscious that actually if risk is going to be a thread that goes right through all our governance decisions, then we have to have it within every bit of paper that we get. So I've got Neville, and then Nicole, and Bruce, and Rob, in whichever order they want to slug that out.
Well, Neville's actually put his hand
Oh, sorry.
I'm just following on from the other conversation, and you mentioned a risk leadership group, and I thought, well, possibly a member of governance that may satisfy some of Councillor McCallum's concerns about how we know how it's progressing. But even now, we do get, OPAC does get regular reports on risk,
yep.
and it is very broad, and it's just, but that may, I'm not quite sure what your thinking is on the leadership group. It'd be interesting to hear.
Yeah, so I think I'm not sure about that, to be honest. I think a couple of thoughts though. So this policy is a council policy, and so I guess with that there is an expectation that if councillors see or understand a risk, that then they can bring that through and add it to the register and get that treated and dealt with. Maybe what you're looking for is more of if there's been an incident and you're looking for escalation of, there's been an incident which is that's triggered a risk, and we're dealing with that you're looking for the escalation of that and understanding how it's being managed.
So it's identified, then you've got to seeing the mitigation measures or whatever that are put in place.
Yeah, and that is the risk management is identifying. I guess there's two parts. Is when you're making decisions, is being explicit about the risks relating to that. You make a decision with that carries risk. So then it's like carrying those the risks and then the treatments associated with those risks through into the register. And so again, being explicit about, again, we've got this risk, but here are the treatments to reduce its likelihood and to reduce its impact.
Councillor Cook, do you mind if Rob answers that?
Oh, that was 14.
Could I just quickly jump, just to build on what Neil was saying? So, look, I'm saying each OPEC you'd see a risk report which would have the colours, and if there was a high risk or something, and you would see that, and you would see the mitigation and get a sense of is this being dealt with appropriately. So I'm not sure you'd need to be around the leadership table. That's for management. But actually, you would see the results of that on a regular basis, and also see what the mitigations are to get a sense of your comfort. And if you thought more needed to be done, then that would be an opportunity.
Thanks. Councillor Cook?
Well, I suppose I have this assumption we're already doing this, that when council makes, well, at the council level, when council makes decisions, there's an assessment of risk around whatever decision we make. So I'm just wondering what will be different. I think Councillor McCallum's question might be more about, when he talks about triggers, be about crises or major departures from normal business, and that's the responsibility as the Chief Executive, as he's just told us, to make sure that council is informed, and it's the operational side of the council that has to be really conscious of those things. So my question at the bottom of that is, what's going to be different? I know we're going to have to quantify all that to be pages of stuff, but what's actually going to be different in practice?
It'll be through your chair. I think just I think helping Neil out probably what you're going to say, Neil, but you'll see it clear. You'll see the risk clearly in one place over time. I mean, risks at the current time and where they're sitting and what we're dealing with. So you'll just see it in one place. You'll see clearly what the mitigations are spent. So I think it'll be just a bit more transparent.
It would help me to understand if we had an example.
Yes, well, I think Bruce had one a couple of months ago. Look, I think that's probably an excellent thing for the next time we meet. Neil,
Yep.
Bruce, did you want to comment then, please?
Right, there we go. Oh, look, Neil, it's a good question. And I think we need to, if I could just reflect a wee bit on history here. We actually do talk about risk, and we have talked about risk, and we've got lots of good examples. I always think, Rob, and I quoted her elsewhere around the country, your ability to talk to us in committee about emerging risks. I remember that's how we started, I think at least at audit at OPAC level, being aware, for instance, of the Mataura dross issue, which at that stage was just an emergent risk. It wasn't what we all know now from the floods, etc. So we've had that sort of informal stuff. We've had a crack at trying to define those sorts of big level risks, Neil, that we would have at this committee, and that hasn't gone anywhere. Similarly, there's been a lot of work mapping, as I understand it, and that was being done previously through a method called ProMap. But again, I don't think the findings of Cook and Associates was that at this stage there is anything that is directly systematic about ensuring we are aware of those risks. So I guess really what we're being urged to do, and I think it's right, given, I'll be blunt, what I think are false starts, that we do this properly. And that's going to be partly in play here through the business today to adopt a risk management policy, and then to actually start doing a couple of things which seem to me inherent in this policy. One is what I would call the operational risks, which largely, unless they are really significant, we won't see. That's our chance, particularly in the meeting, to have the discussion with Rob about how operational risks are going. Does he raise anything? Are we comfortable that the risks are being managed? And one of the other ways in which we see that they are, and we haven't, this is again another area discussed, would be through something like internal audit, or indeed when we hear from our external audit that our systems and controls are in place. So that does leave for us that work to do, and I think, Neil, you're saying that yes, we're going to do this, is actually what are those big, top, whatever we want to call it, significant, strategic, there's a whole bunch of, they're all called different things, probably about 10 or 12 of them, that probably we should frequently on a quarterly basis review. So on a quarterly basis, we will review those, and we'll also be having discussion with Rob and hearing from him about operational risks. We haven't got that in play, we never have. This is, I think, the first step to try and get that in play.
Thanks, Bruce.
Apologies, Mr. Chair. I did text the Vice Chairman.
But he's not here either. So perhaps I need to give you my number. Thanks and welcome. So any more comment on the item? Councillor McPhail.
Just a quick one, and just sitting there listening about risk. Is this, and you mentioned the leadership having a counsellor maybe in there, then is this for us or is it for the management? There's different types of risks. I'm just trying to understand that. Is this a management policy?
So the policy is an organisational policy. So if councillors see risk, then they should flag that to the organisation, and we can incorporate that and put some management plans around that. So that's why it's a council policy, but the operation of it is fundamentally management. The identification, again, there's identification and then there's management of it.
Yeah.
So the identification can include elected members.
You right with that, Jeremy?
Yes.
Yep,
Yes.
gotcha, okay.
I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you, councillor Cook. Seconded by councillor McPhail. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried, thank you. Takes us to item 2, which is the procurement.
Thank you. So this item is just to update council with where we're at on our procurement journey. The policy, whilst the policy is tabled, it's a management policy, and it's just showing that to you that policy was adopted by management at the end of last year. The implementation and the development got a little bit impacted by events being obviously the floods and COVID. However, we have made good progress in recent times with continuing to work with training and implementation of a procurement advisory group and just working through the program of work that we have ahead of us. I have included in the item a recent publication from the Office of the Auditor General, and I think that as a document provides really good guidance for governance as to the questions that governance should be asking with council with regards to our procurement approach and strategies and so forth. We as a procurement advisory group who are charged with the rollout of this program and the implementation of it are using that as a benchmark, I guess, to ensure that we're designing this to be able to answer all those questions. So I've tabled that for your reference. Just to go through the item, where we're at, the state on the bottom of page 19, the core elements to the program is the development of the policy and the manual. So that has been completed. Is to update the council financial delegations. That's the next cab off the rank for us, is to align those update those financial delegations and align them now to the policy and the manual. Then develop the internal capability and capacity, and that is the development of a couple of parts is the development of the procurement advisory group, but it's also the internal training. And so the training was undertaken last month and there are 2 tiers of training for a vast number of the budget holders. The training was more around, here's what you need to be aware of so that you know when to ask for help. And then there was a smaller group that went through a more intensive training of the manual. So then they are now trained to understand the approach and the manual and to be able to run their own procurement processes, albeit that in the first period they'll be supported by the procurement advisory group. There is a need to develop the contracts register, and that's being done later this month. We've got opportunities to develop our standard contract templates. As part of the procurement advisory group is creating a supplier monitoring program, and that's just ensuring that we are getting what we expect from our suppliers and putting some metrics around them so that we're getting that feedback. And then the last item is the establishment of internal controls and reporting, and I've got there, probably taking the guise of a probity audit just to check that we are, as an organisation, we are operating by the policy and we're getting the outcomes that we expect. So I'm happy to take questions. There's probably not too much else that I wanted to sort of cover off. Obviously, there's a lot of detail in the article from the Office of the Auditor General, as well as with our policies being tabled. But I'm happy to field questions with regards to it.
Councillor Cook.
Yeah, just reading through it there and just wondering about, having been in business myself, about local suppliers. Do local suppliers get any additional consideration, or does price rule? How would you decide that?
Yeah, so we haven't factored that in at the policy level. We have made reference that in the policy that we wish to keep the playing field level, but at the end of the day, our focus is on getting fair value for the council and the best value for the council. I do know that some councils, they do have almost price differentials for their local, but we haven't sought to do that. I mean, I guess one of the overarching requirements, though, is that's factored through the policy is the 4 well-beings, which is obviously about supporting communities. So that's there, but we're not being prescriptive around. We should be looking at regional, our local providers with a better lens than we do with other providers.
Which might lead me to Councillor McCallum's question, which was regarding the opportunity for inter-regional deals to be struck. He was wondering where that might fit, if it did fit, if there was an Otago Southland initiative, was his question really, across joint councils.
Yeah.
And how you saw that fitting.
Well, I think with the approach, one of the critical things that we are implementing is to stop and do the strategic thinking up front, and that's understanding what we as an entity want, and with that could be bringing in other entities to I guess give us better purchasing power, and so there is that opportunity. Yeah, I guess it's not specifically sort of spelt out in here.
Well, and would it be appropriate for that to be spelled out?
Just hold on, Chief, can I?
Yep, please.
I mean, we are doing a number of initiatives amongst the regions, and if we do that, then we'll go through a tender process. Through that process, so we could end up with a supplier who from outside the region is quite likely rather than from in the region. But we're doing that sort of work increasingly, as you know, and we'll be continuing that way. And I guess Iris in some ways is a bit like that as well.
And I guess sorry.
Bruce, Councillor Bruce has been put his hand up.
You were next on the list, Bruce.
That's okay, but I'll just leave myself unmuted if that's okay, otherwise I'll avoid the delay.
Do you want to say anything?
Oh, no, so the other thing I was going to add is that we do at times procure from the AOG in terms of the consolidated procurement, which is that's the procurement panel from MB have done those negotiations. So you're getting essentially supposedly good value for money by procuring through there, where all other government entities can procure through them as well.
Thanks. I'm sure Councillor McCallum would be happy with that response. Chairman Horrell.
Just following on from that, we would have thought too of the possibility of working with other regional councils and something like forestry tests. There may well be synergies in having a half the South Island type contract. At the moment, we probably will do it all individually, and we've got our own list of suppliers. But when you start to look at that, the numbers thing, it could be quite effective. I guess, like if you're buying vehicles, I'm assuming that'll be what you're talking about there, that government type thing where you can leverage on the numbers and things like that. But,
yeah, and it is on a case by case basis. At times, to be honest, you can do better than signing up to all of government, and you can do better by going direct. And then there are situations, so we have gone through a procurement program with our TA partners on IT, on some IT services. Not enough. And so, it is on a case by case basis where it is sensible to look to, and that maybe got a little bit lost, but that's, I guess, the critical is doing that strategic thinking up front as to what's going to be sensible as we kick off that procurement process. And if it's deemed that it is advantageous that what we're buying, we know that there's going to be another council that's going to be doing much the same, then it would be advantageous to have that conversation with them up front and to bring them around the table.
Sorry, Bruce, I think it is. I think it is you causing delay issues.
Sorry, I was just thought, okay, just wait me in when I'm due to speak. Thank you.
Well, feel free to go now, actually.
Okay, cool. Okay, and then I'll get back onto mute. Look, I think we just need to recognise what we've got in front of us. We've got a policy in front of us, which is actually how we, big picture, want to approach procurement. And to that extent, it's pretty much, in my mind, fit for purpose. Can I say one of the most critical parts in this is actually that you plan for your procurement. So actually, out of these principles, you are then deciding what is the approach you want to bring to the particular procurement that you have in front of you. I'll give you an example. So, for instance, we're just about to go to market for, this is elsewhere, Taranaki Regional Council, one of your brethren, to rebuild the West Stand at Yarra Stadium. So the first thing that we have done from a procurement perspective is say, what are our objectives? What do we want to achieve? What is the best method? And from then we follow through procurement thing. That's exactly what this is attempting to say that we should do, is actually we should be thinking about what is the best method. So that goes back to what you're saying, Neil. And it may well be that it's through some form of joined up approach. What I say, some of your other regional brethren are much more active in terms of shared services. So like here in the Bay, the region's fully part of a thing called BOCLAS, which is a formal shared service arrangement for quite a number of its procurement. So that's always a possible. You've got Iris, that's totally there. But the critical thing I'm wanting to say is that this here is the principle decision about how we will go about it. You then have to build what is your strategy for any key purchase that you're actually going to make. The one thing that I was going to raise, Neil, was in relationship to our big procurement we're about to make, which is around the shovel-ready stuff around the flood banks. And I just would like to put a word of caution. We should think a wee bit about actually how do we bring those sustainability principles into play. And that will include consideration of local. So I'll be interested to know how we do that. I think that's the next step after we've adopted the policy, might I say, but perhaps just a wee marker that actually how we implement this policy with the shovel ready program will be really important, because there are some expectations coming down the line, as you're well aware, from central government as to how we go about in procurement. I know you've got Robert on board to help with that.
Thanks, Bruce. Which kind of covers off what the question I was going to ask is, the policy that we've got in front of us, does it give us the flexibility to cover off any of the issues that people have raised as and when those operational things are necessary? So I guess it does for me, but I needed to check with Councillor McPhail.
Yeah, and it's good that Bruce brought that up, because that was the only thing I was going to bring up. We've obviously got some pretty big contracts going to be coming out.
Yep.
And even, I've talked with contractors, have passed the comment, is there going to be good transparency, like they're big.
Yep.
They want to make sure that they have the opportunity to get involved in these local ones.
Yeah.
So we are, transparency and it's going to be very important in these.
Absolutely, and so the shovel ready will need to adhere to the policy. And we do know that the Office of the Auditor General is sitting back looking at what happens with all the shovel ready activity. So, we know that those tests and controls are going to be there at that back end. So we need to make sure we're adhering to this at the front end.
Councillor Cook?
Back on my hobby horse about using local people. The idea of the shovel ready project was not to enhance our standing, it was actually to support our community economically. And I think we need to take that into account if we're awarding contracts, and if we're a major employer of contractors, we run the risk of losing some of our contractors if we go outside our region. I think we need to balance that as well. So I'm actually very much in favour of giving some weighting to the use of local contractors, everything else being relatively equal.
Bruce is indicating.
Oh, sorry, Bruce.
And Neville, my point here is that actually Neil's quite right. Some people in the past have had differentials for local contractors. So, if it's within, let's make an arbitrary number, 10% of the last tender, but 10% higher is the local contractor, you go for the local contractor. The idea of sustainability is actually you would work out what actually really counts in terms of the contracts that you get, which create the criteria. So for a major contract where you might suspect that there are large players that will come in, that, dare I say it, in the roading area, the Fultons and the Downers of this world, and they may well be for some of the major contracts we have if they involve heavy machinery. You actually start to think about, so you are asking an RFI, what are they doing and how will they demonstrate that they're contributing to the local economy? Okay, so it's the way in which you then start to craft the RFI or the request for tender, where you start to bring in those ideas about actually how does this more than just benefit you with the lowest cost, actually what are some of the other key principles that really count in here? And a lot of councils are using now the idea of sustainability to bring into the procurement process concepts of local economy, local benefit, the way that you're talking about. That's actually why I say the sustainability principles in here need to be worked through in terms of what actually are the criteria Or rather, how will those be interpreted, and therefore what are the criteria when it comes to individual contract assessment?
Thanks, Bruce. Any further questions? If not, somebody might like to move that we note the progress in the procurement work. Thank you, Chairman Horrell. Seconded, thank you, Councillor Fail. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Takes us to item 3, the Health, Safety and Wellbeing Management System report. All yours, Amy. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Afternoon, everybody. So I'll take the report as read, but save for wanting to, I guess, address a couple of issues which I'm sure came up on your radars. Having read this, one being the notifiable event and the other one being the accident. So first things first, the notifiable event was someone using a piece of equipment that we hadn't used, we don't use frequently, and as they were dismantling it, the handle hit them in the eye. We're still unclear as to whether that damage is permanent or not. The employee is now wearing glasses. It's unclear whether they needed glasses prior to then or not. But given that there was the potential for this to be permanent disability, we notified WorkSafe. The WorkSafe investigator did ring the Health and Safety and Wellbeing business partner, and they discussed the actions that we took at the time. And we had completed our own investigation as to what happened, and they were satisfied with the actions that we took and closed the case. But the key aspect, I guess, there was that there were a series of things that did and did not happen, both from our side and from the hiring agency for the piece of equipment that have now been remedied, are in the process of being remedied, and training was a key component of that. And you'll see a bit later that not only is it training that we need to focus on in some aspects, but actually also doing competency checks, because just because you train someone in something, it doesn't mean that they're good at that. So we're implementing competency checks as part of our training activity for some activities as well. Are there any questions on that? Or do you want to do questions at the end?
No, I was just going to say, if there are any questions about that, we just need to remind councillors that most of those details are private. So any of the, particular, are not for discussion here. So if you have a question that doesn't cover off any of those things, fire ahead. Thank you, Councillor McPhail.
I'm not too worried about who it happened to,
Yeah.
but what was it?
It was a winch.
Winch.
Yeah, so it's one of the winches that we use to get lines over rivers.
Understand one of those tools.
Any other questions, particularly about that incident?
Well, I guess what I picked up on there was it was a piece of equipment that wasn't used very often, and I guess that's one of the things with training is if you're using something infrequently, I guess it's a risk that we identify and
On the list.
mitigate the problem.
Are we talking about the other points as well? Before we just talk
No, just that one thing, Amy, or have you got anything to say about the other items in your report? Or is that it?
talking about the quad bikes.
So,
Yes. Yes.
Are we finished? Yep.
Yes, thank you.
So the quad bike, there was quad bike and motorbike training being held, and the individual on the quad bike performed a manoeuvre which they should not have been performing on the quad bike. There was no injury, but if the circumstances had been different, there could have been an injury. So, it was just luck that there wasn't an injury.
I just asked you through the chair, what staff use quad bikes? Obviously, I know from a lot of with pest management, it's at a subcontractor level, but we also do have some quad bikes in the organisation?
We have one, and it's used by our land and water sustainability team and our biosecurity team. And that's all site visits.
Thank you. Any other questions on that report? Councillor McPhail?
Some stage, just in regards to quad bikes, obviously there, I know a lot about them. In regards to that, but just wondering at some stage, tell me how many Ks, how many kilometres will you do a year?
Okay, I'll check, I don't know that.
Just see the usage of them.
Yeah.
Just to-
It was reported at a previous meeting that the same incident, and that we were reviewing the policy in a sense in there as well, so. And then it exists for much longer.
Yeah, we are, we're talking to people like DOC and Landcorp to see what they're doing, because they've all removed quad bikes from their fleet. So that review's in progress.
Bruce, did you have anything you wanted to say?
I do, thank you. Sorry, if I keep flicking in and out, it's because the video seems to be sensitive. It doesn't like the look of me. Thank you for the report, Amy. Just the thing that I'm interested in is you've instituted this thing called early discomfort forms. Can you just give me a bit of a background? It sounds really encouraging, because I presume this is an attempt to try and get on the front foot with health and safety issues rather than wait for, indeed, what we've just been discussing, the incident side. It's interesting, I haven't heard about that before. I like the idea, so perhaps give me an idea about it, would be great.
Yeah, we do monitor early discomfort through our physio, and that's predominantly, I don't know what you call it these days, repetitive strain injury, RSI of old or OOS, but also, back problems, sitting problems, things like that. So that's just about making sure that we're aware early. Again, sometimes these things are habit forming and about people's behaviour as opposed to fundamentally the task that they're doing. So it's about making sure that we have a shared responsibility with the individual to identify what's going on for them, to make sure that they're getting the treatment that they need early and appropriately, and that whatever they need to be doing, we're doing and they are doing as well.
Thanks, Bruce. Anything else there? Thank you. Somebody like to move that report, please? Thanks, Councillor Cook. Seconded, Councillor Beard. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Takes us to item 4, which is the annual activity plan. Just noting that the recommendation is to review the annual activity plan and resolve to note it. Thanks, Neil.
Thank you, Chair. So we're tabling, obviously, a revised version of the annual activity plan, incorporating the separation of the finance meetings from the risk meetings. This is the format that we propose, and be quite prescriptive about which reports are coming through to which meeting. So it makes it clearer and easier for councillors to understand that. As well as presenting what we have ahead of us in our forward work program. You'll note that a number of the items that were previously represented in our forward work program are no longer there, and that's because they've now formed part of our operating activity plan, and those are things like the risk, the procurement and the fleet management, which were once ahead of us but are now upon us. One other item that I'd like to note, just on page 63, I've got a little note there. In discussion with the chair, we felt that it was appropriate to remove the separate clean air loan report and just to incorporate that as an aspect or an element within the financial report, since this committee's primary objective or focus on that is with regards to the size of the loan and the collectibles of the debt, as opposed to getting into detail about the operation or the state of the clean air. So I'm happy to take feedback. If there's any significant feedback, then we might take that offline and perhaps get that at the end of the meeting.
We're making quite good time, so if there's any detailed dissection of that, then when we'll get together after.
Bruce wants to.
Yes, I'm not finished talking myself though.
Bruce would like to do some
Yes.
detail.
Thank you, Bruce.
Look at that. I get somehow the mute and the videos together, so I'm sorry that it keeps going out. Look, great new report, Neil. Well done, mate. But can I just ask one question, because I think it does relate, it's worth in front of the committee at the moment. I've gone to your page 63, which is to be developed. The bottom two relate to a fund manager review, technically due this month. Of what it's worth, but actually I also note below the SIPO 3 yearly review, which isn't due for another year. But given the discussions we've been having around the long-term plan, our strategy, the particular risks that we had around our managed funds, and we still have with our managed funds going forward, I'm just wondering whether we should be a bit more definitive, at least relative to what we've got here on this side, on these tables, as to when we would do that, number one, because obviously we're not doing the fund manager review right at the moment, but actually also thinking about the SIPO relative to the long-term plan.
Yeah, there is a sequence of events there that that's not explicit there, but you're right in terms of we need to work through our investment policy, our revenue and finance policy, then our investment policy, and then the SIPO is subservient to that. So that's the natural sequence of events which we have to do. So I mean, I could make that more explicit there because I think even doing that, it will influence the decisions that we make with regards to the fund managers, because we may, as a result of working our way through that, make a completely different decision with regards to how we run our portfolio and then the fund management support that we have. So yeah, I'll make that more explicit there, Bruce, just so it's clearer around the sequencing of events.
Any other questions? Thank you, Councillor Beard.
Just in regards to the difference between a debtors review and an aged debtors review, or this financial deep dive. So what were you going to do differently at that sort of 6 monthly point?
Yeah, so what we're intending, and we have done it before, so the debtors review is not dissimilar to what you get now or have had now in terms of it's that high level of this is the aged report over the different debtor categories. But in the deep dive, we do provide a list of the more aged of the debtors and put a list up to council. So that comes through in public excluded, so that council are aware of the more specific details over the our outstanding debts.
Should there need to be write-offs or
Working through what decisions might need to be made with regards to that. Yep.
Councillor McCallum asked me to point out and raise his concern about the 7-week delay that the quarterly financial reporting will result in. He's concerned that that's too long.
So I think on the 29th of October, we have the workshop to look at or to present through to the committee what the financial reporting looks like. And I think that's probably the place to have that conversation, because I guess it is a question of what's more important, time or quality. And I think that's the place that we have that discussion. And I guess with that is showing what is proposed with regards to those changed quarterly reports.
And just following on from Neil's comments, one of the questions with yourself and Neil talked about is, what's good practice in terms of getting financial reporting, and I'd be interested in Bruce's comments on this. What's good practice in terms of you getting some financial information? Just noting we're now 3 months into the financial year, so I'm interested in what your view of that is and what's good practice, I guess, from Bruce. And I think we've talked about this, so this is according to our plan.
Yep.
So we have discussed this, but actually let's reflect on that now, noting we are where we are, and what's your view about the timing? Bruce, what's your view on, can I ask
Yeah,
Bruce?
absolutely.
Thanks, Neil, thanks, Linda. Look, I firstly, quite comfortable with the move that we're making here to draw that distinction, given we have the role around risk management. And I think actually the previous discussion we've had actually reinforces that if we have a more risk-focused meeting, we'll be better for it. And separate that from the financial role. Number one. Number two, I certainly concur with the view that we should go to the formal quarterly reporting. And I think the 29th, Neil, you've said is the date for that, to have that full discussion. And it is a time quality issue. That should be an in-depth, that because we want quarterly reports, that actually should be an in-depth quarterly report, which actually requires, and we should expect from management, a focus there on quality, while not making it untimely either. I actually think, and I'm sidestepping your question here to some extent, Rob, is actually, I think that's something I'd love to see Neil bring to that meeting on the 29th, which actually what is possible, and perhaps what are the trade-offs in terms of actually, should it be 4 weeks? Is a month after the quarter end sufficient? Is 7 weeks, which is another half a month away, adequate if it means better quality information? And the question then becomes actually, will we make better decisions or not? So, it's a bit of an end-to-end process we need to consider there, that trade-off. In terms of actual timing, certainly 7 weeks would be probably the longest you want to go for. I'm trying to be careful with my words here, because again, it would depend on the decisions councils have made in terms of their time and quality trade-off. Look, perhaps what I'd have to say, Rob, let me just ask around again. I should know this off the top of my head and I can't quite, mainly because not all audit committees see the finances for various reasons. So I'll bring that with me on the 29th to give you stronger guidance from what I'm seeing around the sector, and take from there.
Yes, so sorry, just make one additional comment. So at this stage, what we've done is we've fitted the quarterly reporting around our existing meeting program. But I think once we've gone through the work on the 29th, and we understand what the reporting requirements are and we get agreement on that, then we can go back and finance can understand how long it's going to take them to compile that, and then we can restructure the when we meet around that. So in terms of, at this stage, we're fitting around the current meeting program. It would be better that we change the meeting timing to fit around the work program in terms of the quarterly, when we can get those reports done.
Councillor Beard.
So just looking at those dates, the 6 weekly cycle's not quite there with some of them. The date or time between the 30th of June, I know at the other end of the column, and the 3rd of September is a bigger gap than 6 weeks. I'm looking at 17th of February is an okay sort of time frame, knowing that January is a bit of a write-off month. So I'm not going to say that one's not out of alignment. You've got pretty soft time frames at 2 months in some cases to do your reporting, as in the 3rd of September to do a position at the end of June. So you've got 2 months there to. But if you are working on other things as well as in year-end accounts and then no doubt I can understand that you are quite busy at that time, so that's you can accept. And if there's no meeting time for OPAC between the 30th of June and the 3rd of September, then there's nothing that you can give us as ahead of that time frame. I just say if you've given yourself reasonable time, so we will expect good reports at that rate. Unless we get concerned about how the organisation's going, I think we can look at these and say, well, let's see how that works, and to say if the reports are coming in with not significant variances or concerns from a cash flow perspective that we're in trouble, it's worth trying.
Yeah, look, I think if we can have that discussion on the 29th when we work through, and I take, you know, Bruce's point, you know, yes, it's possible to move the dates, but there are trade-offs associated with that. And so I think, you know, we will table some options or variants on that day on the 29th. So, you know, just so that we can sort of work through that and we can get mutual agreement on it. I think one of the areas where, you know, where you're seeing some variation is, as I say, at this present point in time, we've fitted around the existing sort of meeting timetable. And, you know, the September was, you know, from last year or this year. So, you know, the next meeting from 30th of June would look to be sort of 6 weeks on from that.
Okay, so not
Yeah, so it doesn't just loop around. But that said, you know, it would be preferable that we set certainly the financial meeting around the completion of the quarterly reports in the nearest time. And so probably break that 6 weekly cycle, because, you know, we might have a different timeline for when we have the risk reporting.
Thanks, Neil. Nicola?
And I'm assuming if a serious financial risk came up, we would have a briefing in between times, because, you know, we've got set timings. If something came up that was serious enough to require immediate action, that we would have the talks to do that.
Yep.
Thanks, everyone. Any more comments or questions about that? Thank you, Councillor Cook.
Second.
Thank you, Chairman Horrell. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Thank you. Sorry. Brain's moved on. Number 10, I've got no urgent or extraordinary business presented to me so far. So then we will move into public excluded. Please, Mel, will share the reasons for that. Thanks. Hang on, we need the reasons first.
Yes, would be for the confirmation of minutes from the 2nd of September and addressing items 5 to 7. Reasons for passing would be to enable the council holding the information to carry out without prejudice or disadvantage commercial activities, to protect the privacy of natural persons, and to prevent the disclosure or use of information for improper gain or advantage.
Thanks, Mel. Moved by Chairman Horrell that we move into public excluded, seconded by Councillor Beard. All those in favour, please say aye.